Hello, everyone. We're going to get started right now. Thank you so much for tuning in with us today. My name is Lindsay Liu. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Super. I wanted to just begin by acknowledging how tragic and frankly very scary the collapse of the parking garage on 57 Ann Street is. And so I think, in light of all of that, I feel really fortunate that we're joined by Terry Rogers, the founder and publisher of Brick Underground, and Prabhu Paramalsamy and Suchi Jayasena from O&S Associates today. Fun fact, we'd actually been planning to do a webinar on a variety of local laws and regulations, including Local Law 126 for later this summer. But after this deadly building collapse last week, we kind of quickly convened and said that this called for an immediate action to help unpack the critical building safety issues and questions that folks might have around Local Law 126. Context here at Super, the safety and health of buildings and their occupants is something we take very seriously. We are a technology platform that is building the operating system for condos, co-ops, and multifamily buildings, and compliance monitoring is a core component of our offering for New York buildings just because of how important and also how challenging staying on top of regulation is. So I'm really glad that we're joined today by these New York building experts. I'm going to hand it over to Terry to just set us up with a little bit more context.
Thank you, Lindsay, and thank you very, very much for organizing this important webinar. As Lindsay mentioned, I am Terry Rogers, the founder and publisher of brickunderground.com. We are an online resource that helps 4 million readers a year make smarter decisions about New York City real estate. And this June, we're launching a special section for co-op and condo boards, in part to help them navigate an increasingly expansive and expensive regulatory landscape here in New York City. In short, it is a really tricky time to be a building in New York City because there are a lot of new regulations out there to keep up with. For some historical context, not so many years ago, the biggest compliance concern for many boards were the facade inspections and repairs required by Local Law 11. Those inspection and repairs became even more onerous and expensive when Local Law 11 was revamped in 2020 with the facade inspection and safety program, right when boards were in the midst of complying with new energy benchmark and letter grade requirements of Local Law 84 and 95, as well as gas line inspections required by Local Law 152. And looming over all of these is what is potentially the mother of all local laws, Local Law 97, which goes into effect next year and requires most co-ops and condos over 25,000 square feet to meet certain carbon emissions requirements or face potentially severe financial penalties starting in 2025 and ratcheting up considerably in 2030. Fun fact, being out of compliance with Local Law 97 could also possibly put your building on Fannie Mae's unavailable list, which means unit owners and the building itself may not qualify for a conforming mortgage. So big picture, some of the regulations I just mentioned are about improving the overall health of the city and our climate, while some are about ensuring the safety of our building infrastructure. The regulation we're focusing on today falls into the latter category. It's Local Law 126, which incredibly for the first time ever calls for parking structure inspections every 6 years. The structure that collapsed in the financial district last week, killing one person, was scheduled to file its first inspection report under Local Law 126 by the end of this year. To better understand what went so wrong last year, as well as to how to prevent and spot another tragedy in the making, and learn more about Local Law 126 and what co-ops and condos with parking structures need to know about complying with it, we've invited these two top experts from O&S engineers and architects in New York City who have extensive experience studying, planning, designing, and repairing parking structures. One housekeeping note, please feel free to drop your questions in this Zoom webinar Q&A as we go along, and we'll make sure to have plenty of time to answer them at the end. Prabhu and Suchi, take it away.
Okay, we'll go ahead and start the presentation. Okay, so thank you, Lindsay and Terry. Thanks again for the introduction, and thank you for all the audience members for attending. As a little bit of background about us, like Lindsay and Terry mentioned, our firm has been expert in parking garage design, construction, and repair since 1996. In that time, we've evaluated and repaired well over 2,000 structures, and we've been working in New York City since we were founded 27 years ago. In this presentation, we hope to give you a brief overview of what we know about the Ann Street collapse, how to apply those lessons to your garage, and review the new local law 126 requirements. So we'll start with talking about Ann Street and what we know and what we don't know, because I'm sure that's foremost in all of your minds. As a background, it was a 98-year-old structure. It was steel frame construction, and the exact cause of the collapse is still unknown. You may have read many articles and seen news reports, and most of those refer to two things as the probable cause: age and overload. We're going to address each of those things and talk about if we believe they're the cause or not. So in terms of age, 98 years old seems like an old structure, but in reality, if your structure was designed and constructed properly and it has been well maintained, the age is not an issue. A well-maintained structure can operate safely pretty much indefinitely. In the United States, we have structures that are 200 years old. In Europe, there are plenty of structures that are 400, 500 years old that are still operating. So age is not a direct cause. Then you heard and you saw pictures of the parking on the roof and so many cars up there. So people say the deck was overloaded. Is that the case? Possibly, and we're going to talk about that in more detail. But our feeling and from the photos and our experience, we believe the most likely cause was of lack of maintenance and repairs on the structure. Just some observations from the photo. So you can see it was a steel building encased in concrete. Steel is a little difficult because encased steel is difficult because the concrete hides corrosion. It's difficult to inspect. The roof also had an asphalt overlay and a buried membrane, which we'll talk more about what those things mean. So in terms of what we do as structural engineers, you may have questions about what structural engineering is, but at the core, the job of the structural engineer is basically to design the structure to support the load safely. So there's one equation we use that's the basis of everything. Basically, the strength of the structure has to be greater than the load imposed. So in terms of strength, there are a few things that go into it: the strength of materials, the design, and the quality of the construction. So on that side, there is variances in each of those things. So we use safety factors to account for those because we want the strength to well exceed the imposed load. For load, you basically have three factors: the dead load, which is the self-weight of the structure. That's all the steel, concrete, and the permanent, the things that are permanently affixed to the building. The live load, in this case, vehicles, and the environment: wind, snow, etc. So what reduces the strength of a structure? Number one, basically water. Water causes corrosion of steel, not just steel beams and girders, but if you may not be aware, the concrete slabs all have embedded steel bars called rebar. So as water enters the concrete slab, those rebar can also corrode, which causes loss of strength, and will also cause the concrete to spall, which we'll show you pictures of later. What accelerates the process of corrosion is de-icing salts. So the salt that the city or people spread on the sidewalks and roads, cars bring that in. Cars bring in snow, water, salt in the garage where it melts and infiltrates the concrete slabs. And on top of that, just our regular Northeast climate, we have a temperate climate. So we have a lot of freeze-thaw cycles, and that literally means the concrete freezes, then thaws. And our Northeast climate is the worst because we have the most freeze-thaw cycles in any given year. Why are garages particularly at risk? Suchi will talk a little bit more about that.
So big difference between the garages and a building is weather tight and a garage is normally not. There are a lot of openings because sometimes these are open parking structures that brings the wind through to make sure that there is enough ventilation. And a lot of parking structures have windows that are broken, especially in New York City, that brings water. Not only that, most of the deterioration in a parking structure is related to water. What, like Prabhu said, water is brought in by the parking, the vehicles that are parked there. It drops all the ice that are coming with that vehicle, and it gets absorbed to the flow. So it gets absorbed and gets corrosion. So most of the people will think out of sight, out of mind. People don't think about parking structures too much, and they don't maintain them very clearly. So in a building, you will, if you find a problem, you fix the problem right away. If the water is dripping down to your room or your office, they come and fix it. But in a parking garage, nobody really pays too much attention unless it becomes a big problem. So we see a lot of steel corrosion. This Ann Street garage is a steel parking structure. So if you can see some of the images, the top left one is where the column completely dropped, corroded and gave way, and the slab fell about 4 inches. And on the other pictures, you can see corrosion of the beams that are really bad. And also concrete deterioration. So on the top right-hand corner, you can see the soffit of the underside of the slab completely gone because of corrosion on the slab that has pushed the concrete out, and big holes. And on the bottom left one, you can see a spall on the floor itself that's popping up. And also on the bottom right hand, you can see a column that is damaged at the base and in other areas.
So when we talk about concrete spalls, this is a concrete spall. Basically, the layers of concrete are separating and coming apart. And these overhead conditions are very dangerous, not just structurally, but obviously they can fall on people and vehicles.
And on this one also, another picture, concrete spalls on the floor slabs and on the soffit, extremely dangerous conditions, especially the one at the bottom right. You can see the capacity of the slab is completely gone. That creates something called punching shear problems, which will reduce the capacity, and it can lead to a sudden collapse. So these are a couple of pictures that we have seen. On the top one, the drain was clogged, and we had about 4 to 6 inches of water, depending on where it is. That adds about 30-40 pounds of per square foot of the garage. Same thing. And then you see waterproofing failures. On the bottom, that's the membrane that has been plowed, and that renders the waterproofing membrane useless, and it lets the water go into the slab. That makes the corrosion rapidly increase. Same thing with the other one, where the drain has been leaking water, drain pipes, creating spalls in the concrete. So these are bad repairs. So somebody might come and tell you, I'll patch it for you. So, but you got to make sure that it's done properly with the structural value, that we are reinforcing the same structural value that we had before. Some people, you can see some of the patches, they just put some asphalt on the concrete slab, that the structural concrete slab. And this is another one is an overhead patch that, these patches, they just patched it with, sometimes with mortar, sometimes with even stucco. And on the bottom right, you can see the expansion joint has been damaged, and it's letting water go in and into the structure. So these are not really considered structural repairs. It's mostly just patching.
Yeah. So if a contractor or somebody tells you they can do a quick patch for you, it's really a waste of money, because it's not improving your structure at all, and all you're doing is hiding the problem and letting it continue to get worse. So back to vehicle loading, because that was the big talking point in the news. Many stories were saying that the garage was overloaded. So let's talk about if this was true and what exactly is the risk of overloading your structure. So everybody's probably noticed that cars have been getting bigger over the years, from sports cars to pickup trucks. Also, Americans are buying more trucks and SUVs than sedans. Last year, trucks and SUVs were over 80% of new car sales. And you may have noticed in garages that there are height limits posted, and there may be a height bar, but you probably have never seen a weight limit in a garage. On top of that, you've noticed, obviously, more and more people are buying electric vehicles. And we talk about cost, range, charging, but we don't really talk about the weight of the vehicle. So because of the battery, even a mid-size SUV like a Tesla Model X actually weighs more than a full-size gas pickup like a Ford F-150. And then the newest vehicles, like the Hummer EV, which just came out, actually weighs over 9,000 pounds empty. And with 4 people and luggage, will easily exceed 10,000 pounds. In terms of the code, the New York City code allows garages to have a capacity of 50 pounds per square foot. In some cases, you can reduce it to 40. As you can see, Hummer, this is based on its footprint plus 1 foot on either side, exceeds the code value. So is that an issue? Is that something we need to worry about? On top of that, valet parking. So you may have seen this image in the news with these, actually they're all SUVs on the roof, tightly parked like this. Can this cause an overload? And you may have seen car stackers with 2 cars on top of each other. Is this an issue? Actually, it's not as much of an issue as you might imagine. Most garages are designed for this load. The loading for valet parking or stackers really only becomes a concern if the garage is in structural disrepair. In a well-maintained garage, it should be able to support these loads without an issue. One other note, if you do have stackers in your building, the DOB does require permits for these, because an engineer has to analyze your floor and make the floor and structure and make sure it can be supported properly. So to reiterate, almost any type of passenger vehicle parking, even valet parking, pretty much cannot overload a properly maintained structure. EV weights, even though they're high, it's still not the biggest risk you face. If you have a lot of EV parking, it is definitely something to talk to an engineer about and understand what the structure can withstand. But it's not, the passenger vehicles are not the biggest loading risk. There are loads we should be concerned about depending on how you use the garage. Number one, public assembly. Garages are not zoned for public assembly. So if you want to host an event on your garage roof, it really needs to be analyzed because the public assembly load is much higher. Storage of materials, you've probably seen the garages used as storage facilities. Things like pavers, concrete bags are very, very heavy and they cause a point load. Same with planters. A tree planter like this easily weighs 5,000 pounds and it's in a tiny, maybe 4 by 4 square foot area. Construction vehicles, every single winter, especially in the outer boroughs and suburbs, there's at least one garage collapse, either from somebody piling snow or bringing a improper vehicle like a front end loader or a bulldozer onto a garage. And then more day to day, if you have delivery vehicles, especially multi-axle vehicles, your garage really should be analyzed for those loads and for fire trucks as well. So there is some good news. It's not all doom and gloom. So the good news is that even under significant overload, well-maintained garages can usually resist the load, but if they do fail, they're actually designed to fail in a visible and localized manner. So visible means that you may have large cracks, the beams and columns may deflect visibly, but you should have time to evacuate and avoid any loss of life. In the example Suchi talked about in this deck, you can see this column on the left, actually, it pretty much exploded. There's nothing left of it. The deck settled 4 inches, but there were people here, there were cars driving on this, and everybody was able to evacuate. There were no injuries. Honestly, they almost didn't even notice this. It was actually some time after it happened when somebody noticed this happened. then there's the bad case. If the garage is already distressed, then even normal loading can cause an immediate failure. So that's a failure without any warning. And then what happens is the failure of one distressed member causes the other distressed members next to it to fail. That's what leads to a catastrophic collapse like Ann Street.
So how did he get this bad? So there's a lot of factors that go into that. So there are three groups that are looking at this. One is the owner or the board of the condo, residents and the customers who are using it, and the operators. So each one has different roles. The owners, they want to increase the property values. So they want to upgrade the lobbies, hallways, or landscaping, and to minimize the fee increases. Residents, they just want to find the cheapest parking cost, needs to be fast, and don't damage my car. Operators, they want to increase the revenue. So what they do is they stack the cars right next to each other. They want to reduce the operating cost. They will invest in tech automation to get more profit, but nobody really looks at the garage itself and make sure that it's safe. You want to spend money wherever they want, anywhere else other than in a parking garage. So structural deterioration, if you take care of it right at the beginning, maintain a nice garage, your cost of repairs goes significantly down. If you look at the line that is on the lower, the blue line, that is if you do maintenance as it comes, the cost is very low. And if you let go the maintenance, on the black line that you see, it comes a point where you really, it's catastrophic failure. And if you act earlier, you can reduce the cost, but you still have, there's repetitive repair. So the best thing to do is to maintain the garage without going into a higher area where you need to spend a lot more money.
Because basically the deterioration cycle is exponential, because a little bit of deterioration allows more deterioration to occur faster. So then that's why these lines move up so steeply and quickly. And I'm a board member of my own building, so I know that this seems like a lot, but in reality, any building requires maintenance. Like I know in my own building, we have to check our boiler every year. We check our elevators, our fire alarm, our fire sprinkler, and it's just part of our yearly process. So it may take some work up front, but the garage structure should also be part of your yearly maintenance checklist. So number one is the line that you want to be on. That's doing yearly preventative maintenance and avoiding any major repair program.
So annual maintenance, that reduces what we have to do later on. So we recommend yearly walkthrough by an engineer to inspect the garage. We look at the waterproofing membrane, we look at the drains, any other leaks, we look at steel corrosion, potholes and trip hazards. One of the biggest things in one of these this kind of parking structures is there's spray-on fireproofing. If water leaks in there, it will hold that water and keep corroding the steel beam that is covered, and you wouldn't know that it's damaged until a catastrophic failure. So you got to keep an eye for that. You should wash down your floors every 6 months or so that right at the beginning of spring and fall, so that any salt that is brought in by the parking cars will go away and not get absorbed to the floor. So waterproofing is there are a lot of costs that higher cost and lower cost. weatherproofing the building envelope is very expensive. So you need to completely enclose, provide ventilation. To get the water out, you can slope the floors much easier. A 2% pitch is very easy to attain, but it's a lot more expensive. Installing a traffic barrier waterproofing membrane in all the areas, especially at the entrances, ramps, and lower floors, become priority because those are used excessively. This will stop the water getting absorbed into the concrete and creating problems. And you can also install flow drains in ponding locations. You should check drains and pipes and clogging immediately, because that will stop any water getting into your structure and corroding them.
So going back to Ann Street, based on all the things we talked about, what can we now conclude about it? So one thing I noticed when I checked the certificate of occupancy was that when it was built in 1926, the roof was not permitted for parking. I also went through the DOB permit history to see how many repairs were done on this building. So, in the known history, even though it's a 100-year-old structure, the only permitted repair program was in 2010 for concrete and facade repairs, and it only had a cost of $40,000, which is not a lot for a garage this size and age. It's possible that they had other repair work done that was not permitted, and I'm sure the DOB is investigating that and trying to find the full history of this garage. But based on this, also, if you notice the work on floors 1 through 3, the roof, which is what collapsed, was not even part of this work. So it really seems, according to public data, that this garage did not have sufficient maintenance. So based on all that, what do we conclude? So we can find that the roof parking was added in 1957. It was rated at 75 PSF, which is actually higher than the current code. If you remember the Hummer example, the Hummer EV at 59 PSF, even if you valet park those, side by side, end to end throughout the whole roof, it would not exceed 75 pounds per square foot. So heavier vehicles and valet parking to us were not the contributors to this collapse. Our conclusion is that lack of maintenance, especially on the roof, was the most significant factor. And this leads to the local law 126. If you've ever gone through local law 11, it's pretty much exactly the same, even the same language. Basically, it applies to parking structures with more than 3 vehicles, whether they're self-standing or part of a building. A DOB certified qualified parking structure inspector performs inspection every 6 years. You can file the report as safe. That means no repairs are required until the next cycle. Safe with repairs and engineering monitoring, meaning that some repairs are required before the next report is filed. Or unsafe. Unsafe means that, number one, it means that you have conditions that immediately threaten public safety. So you have to do 3 things. First, the DOB actually requires you to notify them. That's in the law. Number 2, you have to provide protection of that area or close that area, and you have to begin repairs right away, and you have to complete the repairs within 90 days or file for an extension. But realistically, you have to start the repair program immediately. Closing thoughts. So, following up on the garage inspection, if you hire an engineer, will they guarantee your structure is safe? And the simple answer is no. There are too many unknowns. The garages are old. We don't have original documents. We don't have original calculations. So it's impossible for an engineer to come in and tell you your garage is absolutely safe. So then you're asking, what can I do? Number one, if your garage has been standing for years or decades, we have to assume that it was designed and built correctly. That means your responsibility should be to maintain the structure in as close to its original condition as possible, because then you at least know that you're supporting the loads that you're imposing on it every day. Make garage inspection maintenance a yearly task, just like your other building systems. And then start budgeting in your reserves for structural and waterproofing repairs. Usually you do, in addition to the yearly work, you probably have to do some kind of program every 5 years. A budget is about $3 to $5 per square foot a year. That depends on the age, the existing condition, but that's a kind of a baseline number. When you have an engineer come in, they will give you a more accurate number to work towards, and then implement proven preventative actions. Number one, like we said, water is the main culprit. So drain cleaning, fixing leaks, and installing a membrane. So we do want to leave you with some positive news. The good news is that most garages are designed properly with safety factors, and a major collapse like this is very rare. And with regular inspection and maintenance, your garage should remain safe for the foreseeable future. All right, thanks everybody, and we're ready to take any questions.
Thank you so much for that. That was really helpful. I know Terry and I have a few questions we wanted to kick off with, and I see some of the questions coming in. So we'll give folks a couple more minutes to share any of them. But I know, Terry, you had a question around freestanding garages versus co-op ones. Do you want to kick off with that?
Right. Yeah. So when you're a co-op or condo with a garage, they're usually underground. Are underground garages more protected from this kind of damage?
They are in some ways, because obviously the building is on top of them. So you would expect, if the building is weather tight, the garage is also. But in reality, underground garages have their own issues, because they're underground. Obviously, water seeks lowest level. So cars bring in water. Water comes down the ramp when it rains and snows. Also, when you're underground, you have groundwater issues. Pretty much every underground garage we've seen has some kind of water coming in through the walls or floors. So it's hard to say. A self-standing open garage probably is more susceptible to deterioration. On the other hand, an underground garage with a building on top of it is, even if it's less susceptible, the risk is much bigger, because you have so many more occupants who are at risk.
Right. Makes sense.
A question about local law 126 inspections specifically. So how should owners be preparing for this? And I know you talked about the next steps for what happens if you find an unsafe condition, but what if there's something that is not necessarily urgent, right? How do you typically advise your customers around dealing with things and being proactive, to your point, on finding things and starting to deal with them as they come along?
I think the best thing is to get on top of the problem. You need to go talk to somebody, make sure that it is what kind of problem it is. If it is a waterproofing problem, if it is structural problem, engineer who's familiar with parking garages can tell you, oh, you don't have to worry about it too much, let's do it this way. But if it is a big structural problem, that's the one you need to go and attack right away. Like we said, waterproofing is a very big preventer of a lot of damages. So you need to keep an eye for that.
Yeah, and related to that, there are a lot of very, talented and smart structural engineers who design, skyscrapers and apartment buildings. They may not necessarily know parking though. So, because it is a kind of a niche industry, it's only now really coming to light for most people, because without experience looking at parking structures, they may either, underestimate the problem or overestimate it, because either is bad. Obviously, underestimating, you're leaving something unsafe, but you also don't want to, exaggerate the problem too much and cause unnecessary disruptions and unnecessary costs to the owner.
And I
That
see
makes sense.
a question that's come in that feels like a good follow-on to that. So if an inspection is determined safe, but repairs are required, what is the time frame that those repairs must be made?
So it's two separate things. So safe is one category. Safe means you pretty much don't have to do anything for the next 6 years, report-wise. Obviously, if things can happen in 6 years, it's a long time. If you have an unsafe condition, the owner of the building is always responsible for keeping their building safe, regardless of what the report says. So safe is one category. Then the next one is SREM, safe with repairs and engineering monitoring. That means there's a list of conditions that are not unsafe to the public, but they may become unsafe before the next report cycle. So in our report, we'll give you the condition, we'll give you the time frame that you need to repair it by, and those will need to be repaired before the next 6 years.
Yeah.
And that will require hiring an engineer, permitting, hiring a contractor, and doing the work.
If a problem is noted in the report this cycle, you cannot have the same problem in the next cycle. So that needs to be fixed before the next filing is done. But engineer has a lot of leeway in saying, okay, this can be done within the next 2 years or next 3 years, or you need to do it within the next 1 year or so. But it cannot go on to the next cycle.
Thank you for clarifying that. So you brought up SREM, safe with repairs, engineering monitoring. We have a question around that, around the recommendations of having yearly walkthroughs done, and if we're going to see that more frequently with that SREM as required by law.
So yearly monitoring is a part of this program, Local Law 126. You, as the owner, is supposed to inspect it yearly, and you can assign it to somebody who can do it. You can do it yourself also, because once we do the inspection, we are supposed to give you a checklist that has check this, check the beams, check the waterproofing, check the drains. So you can assign it to somebody, some of your subordinate, or you can even hire an engineer if you want to do that, and make sure that everything is smooth and safe.
Yeah, and as the owner, you are supposed to keep your yearly checklist dated, signed, and available if the DOB wants to inspect those checklists.
And is that slide with some of the things to look at there? Is that kind of a starting point for buildings to work off of?
Yeah, those are the very basics, and then the checklist also will have more specific things. Like if we see specifically like a beam that may be, possibly like at risk from some water infiltration or something, we'll say specifically check this beam every year. Or the engineering monitoring part of it says you need an engineer to come back in 1 year or 2 years and look at this beam or column or what have you. So there's owner's obligations and then engineer's obligations as part of that.
Right. And we do have a question around whether we will send the deck that has that information. Is that something we'll be able to send around to all of the attendees after?
Yeah, that's fine.
Perfect. Great. So we'll be able to send all of those details that has that in there. Okay, back to SREM. Clarity on the urgency of repairs for that versus unsafe. So question is, to my knowledge, SREM repairs can be completed by the next cycle as long as owners file an amended report 3 years in. Is there any insight you can share on what this amended report entails?
I don't think it's necessarily 3 years, but basically the SREM, let's go back one step. If there's a condition that we feel is going to become unsafe within 1 year of the inspection, that has to be unsafe. So SREM has to have a repair date of more than a year, minimum. But then it's up to the engineer's judgment to say, does this need to be fixed in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, or can you wait until the next report cycle? If you do want to do amended report, you can do that. If you have SREMs and you want to fix all of them and amend your report as safe, you can do that. You can do your repair program, have the engineer come back, check that they're all corrected, and you can file a safe amended report too. There's nothing preventing you from doing that.
Great. And then for unsafe repairs, is there an actual deadline? I think I heard you say 90 days. But...
Yes.
Yeah.
Unsafe repairs, the most important thing is we have to immediately inform the DOB that there is an unsafe condition in this garage. That's a very tricky one because that creates a lot of problems for owners, and we want to avoid that, but it's a mandatory requirement that's written in the code.
There's also, when you're preparing for the inspection, unsafes encompass a wide range of conditions. Like an overhead spall is unsafe for people, but it may not be a structural issue that's going to cause a failure. In those cases, as an owner, if you have maintenance, like a super and maintenance people in your building, or you have a contractor you work with, if they can come the same day and remove loose concrete or, fill a pothole or something, then it can go from unsafe to SREM until the permanent repair can be made. But more significant structural conditions either need to be closed or shored. Basically cars and people can't go in that area until those are protected.
Okay, great. And follow-on question from someone else is, we all know how long projects typically take in New York. So for unsafe repairs, what recourse do owners have if the necessary repairs take longer than the time frame allotted by the law?
So we can do many things actually. The first thing that we do is we cordon off the area, block everybody from accessing, and the next thing we do immediately is try to, if it is a failure condition, we'll shore up the area. We'll bring some shoring posts, shoring towers as necessary. We'll show that area up all the way to the, if necessary, few levels, so that it's avoided right now. But those are the things that we mostly do.
Yeah, from the DOB perspective, in terms of complying with the 90-day requirement, they will allow you to file extensions, but you have to submit proof that you are making progress toward a repair. So that could be, number one, show that you have protection in place, that you have an engineer under contract, maybe you have the drawings filed. So whatever proof you can show that the project is moving forward, they will tend to grant you an extension. And those 90-day extensions, I think, can, as long as you're working and making progress, it's almost indefinite.
Okay, perfect. Some other questions. So depending on the location of the garage and accounting for seasonal weather. So the question is, if there is weathering on the building envelope, is that still a major concern? If it's in an area that perhaps is hot all the time and very rarely rains or snows, do you have different types of concerns?
Yeah, I mean, the ideal climate would be a hot, dry climate in terms of protecting the structure. If you can avoid rain and salt, you have an issue where now your sealants will probably wear out faster. But on balance, like a garage in Arizona is going to last much longer with less maintenance than a garage here.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah. Yeah.
So in a co-op and condo situation, if they've leased out the garage to an operator, who's responsible for all of these things, for the inspection and for paying for stuff?
So that's a legal question, really. Most of the time it's written in their lease who's responsible for what. So
yeah,
that needs to be clarified. That need to have a chat between the owner and the leasee.
Yeah, but what we will say is that if you're the owner, if you're a board and you have a operator who's leasing the garage, if there is something unsafe, it's still your building. Whether it still pays to be proactive in making things safe and then sorting out the financial obligations afterward. Because if something, if a collapse happens or a failure happens, as a building, you're still responsible, at least initially, and you'd rather avoid all that.
Yeah.
Even if you don't have to pay ultimately, there's still going to be a lot of time and money lost trying to sort those things out.
An attorney suggested to me when I was talking to him about this that if it's the garage operator's responsibility to get the report, they're not actually obligated to show it to the building. Do you know anything about that? Like,
no,
I'm pretty sure they're obligated.
Yeah,
because
actually it's written in the code saying that you need to provide a report to the owner of the building.
Also, all of these every report, whether it's this or Local Law 11, they're all publicly available on DOB Now.
okay.
If you Google DOB Now safety, you can find your building address, and then there's a safety portion, and it has all your reports there.
So not just like that there were no problems, but if there are problems, it'll articulate what they were.
It'll show the full report with everything we upload to DOB Now is available publicly.
Thank you.
Just to clarify, is that the case for local law 126 yet? Because I believe you still file that via email today.
They just opened the portal
I
last.
just did.
Yeah.
Okay. I bet you they're moving fast on it. Yeah.
Yeah, actually before this, it's a coincidence. Yeah.
I mean, there is a question here about the rollout of local law 126. And just to clarify for folks, that began, the first cycle is underway, due at the end of this year for lower Manhattan buildings. Do you anticipate that the DOB is going to expedite the rollout as a response to this event?
No, I don't
I
think so.
don't think so, because it's the first cycle. Also, DOB itself only has so much resources to review these reports. But we do know they have put together a task force and what they're doing is they're looking at garages with a history of violations and trying to focus on those immediately. But we haven't heard anything about the rollout being accelerated in any way.
Okay, great. And then another local law 126 question. Are there any distinctions in that local law between a garage open to the public and one strictly for use of residents in the
No.
building?
Any garage, any structure that has more than 3 cars is part of this. So if you have a condo garage that's self-operated and self-parking, it's still part of this.
Do you think?
Wait,
Go
oh, sorry. One question that's not on the list. Since you guys are such experts, what do you look for when you're parking your car in a garage? Like, what are you looking for before you hand over the keys?
I mean,
Or do you?
that's a great question, because in a valet, situation, we can't see anything because you're not allowed up
Oh, true.
into the garage. And we're like anybody else. We're still looking for the cheapest hourly rate and bird special or something. So it's yeah, but in a self-parking garage, you can only do so much, make sure there's no loose concrete over your car. That's basically it.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
a low bar?
Yeah.
Right.
Do you expect that there will be letter grades that will be issued similar to local law 11?
Not right
I
now.
don't think so. I
don't
think
so.
I think the unsafe versus safe is the big distinction.
Mhm. Okay. And then we had a question that came in earlier via email. What advice do you have for potential buyers of a condo and co-op who are considering a building that has a parking garage? So do you see it's common for potential buyers to tour that parking garage? And if so, should they be looking out for these things?
No,
What should their lawyer be looking for in due diligence?
yeah, we were actually, when we talk about how boards and owners, they, put all their money into lobbies and amenities, it's because that's what people look at. No, I don't think anyone's ever asked to tour the parking garage. You might say, great, you have one or not. But now, since since Local 11 came up, people do ask, can I see the report? Are you safe or unsafe? Now people will start asking, did you file the report? Is it, what's the condition of it? And then if it's unsafe, you would want more information. You say, did you bid this out? What's the cost of repairs? How will it affect my maintenance fees? I think all those questions are going to start coming up soon.
And are you aware that, home inspectors that typically do the inside and interior of condos and co-ops, do they typically also inspect and know what to look for in places like garages?
No. And because when I had my inspector, they basically just look at the walls of your condo. That's it.
Okay, great. We have a pretty specific question here about capital repairs on a roof that happened a couple of years ago, was permitted and approved by the DOB. Now they are covering it with pavers and creating a roof deck, which also has permits from the DOB, but is that going to create a problem with their future inspection in 4 years?
I mean, if it is approved, it shouldn't be an issue. You want to make sure that you hire a proper engineer to make sure that it's not overloading or anything like that. And if you're putting pavers in for assembly, that means your live load requirement is very high. It's like 100 PSF. So parking garages right now are designed for 50, and now it has been reduced even to 40. That I expect that to go up a little, but you got to make sure that is properly accounted for.
Yeah, so assuming their engineer did the calculations and the permit was filed correctly, the one thing that they need to consider is that if they must have a roofing membrane, on that garage roof right now. Before you put pavers or any burden on it, just be 100% certain that that membrane is intact and you have no leaks into the garage. Because once the paver's on there, your cost to repair the membrane is, you know, double, triple, quadruple what it would be before you put those pavers on.
Amazing. I've got one final question, Terry. I'll make space for you if you have another.
That's fine.
So mine was about kind of beyond local law 126. What are the other types of safety inspections buildings and their managers should be paying attention to for kind of the core stability and safety of the building?
So for the, you know, the biggest one is still local law 11. That's probably the most significant to in terms of cost and also to the public. There is no real building structure inspection because, as we said, really, as long as your building is weather tight, the structure is going to be in pretty good shape. But you know, there's local 11 now. There's 126. Other than that, there's no real in New York State. There's no real structural inspection. We haven't heard of them rolling out anything, but you know, we'll keep on top of that if they do.
Yeah, one last question from me. All of these problems that you mentioned that can happen in garages, to what extent could they have been caused with like shoddy construction at the beginning? Like concrete wasn't given enough time to cure, or there wasn't enough concrete. And how can you tell, like if you're a building that's going to have to foot the bill for all of this, you know, are there fingers to point and how would you know?
I think it depends on the age. If the garage is more than 10 or 20 years old, it becomes very, very difficult to go back to the original construction and try to find fault with that. A lot of construction defects, especially like structural ones, they will show up pretty quickly. You know, like you said, if the concrete wasn't allowed to cure, they'll be obvious. You know, they have huge cracks. Another thing that happens is they pour the garage slab and then they drive over too quickly, and then you'll see, you know, big deflections, big cracks. Things like that. Those are pretty obvious and noticeable things. But definitely, you know, there are plenty of cases where we start repairing a slab and it just turns to dust because they used bad cement, bad stone, everything. But we're all dealing with structures that are like 50 years old, so it's too late to do anything about that. Too late. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
That's all the time. So Terry, let's close out.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge in this webinar. I hope that our audience is better able to navigate this new additional regulation and people feel safer and more equipped.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure.
Thank you so much. And like we said, we will share the slides with the attendees here, including a summary. We'll also include a recording of this webinar. So there will be a link for that, so you can share that out with anyone else that you need to. But thank you all so much for your time today and for the excellent questions as well. I feel like I learned a lot.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Have a good one.